Hello everyone, Ben here, and today I wanted to take a bit of time to discuss one of the big parts of sim racing that we all want to avoid: damage. Picking up or avoiding damage is a fundamental part of racing in the real world, and so it is in the sim world too. But different sims approach the implementation of damage in varying ways, and how they do this has a fundamental impact not just on how spectacular big crashes look, but on the overall racing experience too. Now, for those of you who've played iRacing and RaceRoom, the answer to which has the better damage system might seem glaringly obvious. Surely it's iRacing. Well, maybe, but as I'll try to convince you through this video, I'm not so sure it's as clean cut as that. And let's be clear, all of what's about to follow is subjective. I enjoy both games, and I'd love to hear what you think in the comments, especially if you disagree with me. And of course, remember that if you find yourself enjoying this video at any point, please hit the like button, and if you want to see more from the channel, get subscribed too so you don't miss any videos in the future. One thing you'll often hear in discussions about damage is whether something is or isn't realistic. Very often with a subtext that the more realistic something looks or appears, the better it is. But I think this is the wrong way to look at it. Even the most sophisticated damage models in sim racing aren't particularly realistic, and for very good reason. The computing power required to simulate a truly realistic damage system would be enormous, and that processing power is ultimately better spent improving the racing experience and realism of other areas. A better way of classifying different damage systems, in my opinion, is on the one hand, how sophisticated are they? Or in other words, how many different kinds of damage can you sustain? Do different kinds of damage impact car handling and speed in distinctive ways? And does this vary from car to car? On the other hand, the other way of thinking about a damage system is how punishing is it? How sensitive is the car to sustaining damage, and what are the implications of doing so? Just how much slower does getting damage make you, and can you repair the damage you have sustained, or are you stuck with it? Most importantly, the design choices made by different sims across these areas have fundamental impacts on all aspects of the title, stretching way beyond whether something looks or feels realistic. So with all of that in mind, let's compare RaceRoom and iRacing. Both take a very different approach to modelling damage, which has evolved and developed over the last few years. On almost all levels, the damage modelling in iRacing is more sophisticated and more punishing than that of RaceRoom. A quick look at the footage playing now shows the variety of ways cars can sustain damage, and I think it looks pretty spectacular. Clearly a lot of work has gone in to ensure that the crash physics look realistic, and it creates a highly immersive experience when you're in the cockpit. Albeit the game doesn't do a great job of telling you what is wrong with your car, even with Crew Chief installed. And there's various issues with collision detection too, and cars blending into each other, which may well be a byproduct of running global network servers. It's also very brutal in terms of the impact it has on your race. Crashes like those on screen wreck your session, even if you're running a series like the USF 2000 where you get one instant fix from damage back at the pits once you've spent minutes being towed there. If you're not running a series with this option, then be prepared to be stationary for 10 to 20 minutes as mechanics work on fixing your car, and even then you're unlikely to be able to run at full speed post the accident. Even minor collisions can cost you 2 to 3 seconds per lap, meaning that even if you're avoiding a trip to the pits, your race is essentially ruined. And I quite like this. As I've covered in my Becoming a Better Sim Racer video recently, the high stakes of racing and iRacing have helped me improve my racecraft no end. By comparison, here's new footage of the biggest crash I've witnessed on RaceRoom's ranked servers recently, an F3 car flipping at Spa. Now, although it looks slightly janky, there's still something pretty cool about seeing the way the cars come together, and the other impacts as the incident plays out look pretty awesome too. However, although I can't hop on board to see exactly what damage was sustained by the drivers involved, the fact that the driver that flipped resets to the track instantly, not back to the pits after a delay as in iRacing, and is able to carry on in the race at a decent enough pace to be catching us by the end, says everything you need to know about the damage system here. Namely, that the damage system in RaceRoom is by and large very generous. There are exceptions to this. Drive a classic car and get your gear shifts wrong or collide with a wall and you'll see damage to the transmission and aero occur pretty rapidly. Hit a raised curb in an open wheeler and your suspension will suffer big time. But clearly the damage is not sophisticated enough to model damage levels across all car classes in the same way as iRacing does, nor is the implementation of the damage as punishing. So, does this mean that iRacing is better? Well, I'm not so sure. My take is a damage model is no different to all of the other features included in a racing sim. They're all there to increase authenticity, improve the racing experience, or help the player to use the sim. But there are often trade-offs involved here, and the reality in iRacing is the punishing and sophisticated damage model can mean driving in the sim feels less like racing and more like praying for survival. That's because although a punishing and sophisticated damage model should, in theory, ensure everyone on track is that bit more cautious and respectful of one another, the reality of open online lobby racing is that there will always be a proportion of the grid that doesn't see things that way. In a grid of 10, 15 or 20 cars, it only takes a few such drivers to ruin a race. And while I think running in iRacing has improved my racecraft, the ultimate truth is I haven't had anywhere near as much fun playing the sim. In fact, at times, it's been absolutely maddening. Sure, it may get better the higher you increase your rating, but the majority of people who play iRacing will never get above a 1.5 or 2k rating, in part because they continually get wrecked in the races that they do run. The only way to combat this consistently is to run in a community of trusted racers with either a very strong racing ethos around fairness and good conduct on track, or a very efficient stewarding system. But is that really the point of iRacing, the world's biggest online racing sim? Contrast this with my experience this week in RaceRoom, where on lap 1 of a 40-minute formula race at Spa, I got caught up in this incident, and this incident, and then caused this incident. Now, to emerge as I did with 0 damage from these crashes is very lucky, even in the context of RaceRoom's less punishing damage model. But the upside is that once we'd gotten through the first lap nonsense, I was still able to run an enjoyable 40-minute race rather than could be consigned to the pit lane and dropping multiple laps down. I think the key here is that the damage system is one of those areas which most exposes the difference between racing in the real world compared to racing in a sim. The recent collision between Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen is a great high-profile example of the stakes involved in real-life racing and the role that car-to-car contact and damage plays in them. Not only was the high-speed shunt enough to take Verstappen out of a crucial race in the championship, it would also necessitate a hospital visit for the driver. In addition, Red Bull have released a statement suggesting the crash will cost the team north of £1 million and necessitate a grid penalty later in the season for the use of additional engine parts. For these reasons, this kind of incident is actually very rare in Formula 1, particularly at the front of the field. Because the potential costs are so high, the judgment of drivers and teams alike is usually to leave a margin, to fight hard but not recklessly. And where in the past we've seen drivers incapable of keeping out of regular accidents, they've more often than not lost their seat in the sport. This is even more acute in other forms of motorsport, where very often the money involved is the driver's own, and writing off your car can mean not competing again in a particular season of racing. In sim racing, these risk factors simply don't exist to the same degree, which partly explains why incidents like this are actually pretty common in most sims that have open online lobbies. You're not going to sustain personal injury, and your team is not going to be stuck with a bill of millions if you stack it into the wall or somebody else. And in many scenarios outside of a league, you can usually have another go at the race you're competing in, even online, where ranked servers on RaceRoom or official races on iRacing are usually repeated every hour or so. So is iRacing right to prioritise sophistication and strictness over RaceRoom's simplicity and generosity? I think it's a much closer call than most would immediately think, and if I was pressed to give my view, well, I think the reality of open lobby online racing would lead me to adopt RaceRoom's approach. Of course it can be tweaked and improved, but the emphasis on enabling people to race, even if that involves car-to-car contact, is for me the right one, and in part explains why I keep coming back to RaceRoom's ranked servers far more often than I do iRacing. But what do you think? I'd love to hear your reflections in the comments, including ways in which each title might improve the way they implement damage in the future. We'll be running many more races in both, trying to avoid damage at all costs, so make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of them coming up. and I'll see you next time.